Welcome to this episode of Samvadanam. Mridula Anand in conversation with S. Vijay Kumar. Sculpture and Indian temple art are Vijay's passions. He is largely self-taught and started documenting his learning process in Tamil and English on a bilingual blog site, Poetry in Stone, writing extensively on sculpture and art appreciation, targeting early audiences to introduce them to understanding the nuances of our temple art. The effort continues to be purely non commercial and supported by volunteers. He and his team of dedicated volunteers aim to document and build an online searchable archive of temple art on the internet. Vijay is a regular speaker and columnist for The Hindu, Times of India, and other dailies. He also conducts free workshops to schools and colleges to encourage the next generation to take up an interest in our art. Vijay has been instrumental in tracking high-profile trafficked Indian artifacts for the past 16 years and works closely with various pan-global organizations assisting in their restitution efforts, including the dramatic return of Vriddhachalam Ardhanari, Sri Puratan Nataraja, the Toledo Ganesha, the Bald State Alinganamurti, the Cushion Buddha from the National Gallery of Australia, and many more. His background work led to the dramatic 20 million raid conducted by the Homeland Security USA during the Asia Week in New York City, apart from a key role in uncovering the antiquities smuggling network of Subhash Kapoor and the $108 million seizure of 2,622 objects in America. The same are chronicled in his non-fiction book titled The Idol Thief, published by Juggernaut Books. We're so glad to have Mr. Vijay Kumar join us today for this podcast and of Samvadanam. Thank you so much for joining us, given the time difference and your schedules. Thank you so much, Vijay.
Thank you so much.
So let me start off with asking, given your vast experience in it, how large is the problem of idol theft? How global is it? And this is something we would like to understand.
The global art market is a unstudied, unpoliced, unmonitored market that runs into billions of dollars that has escaped being under the radar for a long time. Maybe because it was considered to be the domain of the rich and the famous and the influential for a too long time, the policymakers per se, and the erstwhile colonial powers. So it was considered something that would not be used for any nefarious motives. But then of late, recently, I would say that the tides have changed. So on global basis, I would say that it's not something new. It's been happening for a long time. Objects of art have always been looked at as plunder. And we've always seen people taking away stolen art. But then India is very unique because we are the only, I would say, civilization in the world that is being affected by this, I would say, the art market cabal that is robbing existing temples. So basically, if you're talking about Egypt or if you're talking about Italy, they're robbing tombs, they're robbing excavation sites which are not under continuous worship.
Right.
In Cambodia, for example, they've lost a lot of objects. But here in India is probably the unique place in the world where we, for example, we look at them as living gods. In fact, in Tamil, we call the bronzes Thirumenis, which literally means bodies of God. So literally, these bronzes would be woken up in the morning, they would be bathed, they would be sung to, they'll be fed, ceremonies will be done. In the night, they will be taken to sleep to their own bedrooms, sung to, lullaby sung to, and so the priest would literally look them up as living gods. And to see them with a price tag, to being openly auctioned, to be commoditized, to become showpiece videos is something that is why after about 8 years of work in this one-man effort, so we formed a group called the India Pride Project, literally meaning restore India's pride, one artifact, one murti at a time with a couple of friends. But then what is more interesting is the questions that you asked is this is a multi-billion-dollar market, and India has been losing major works of art. Our estimates are we lose about 10,000 major works of art every decade. And when we say major works of art, for us, these are priceless. These are gods. So
Right.
a dollar is too much. But I would say about $50,000 to $100,000 as a benchmark. We're losing about 10,000 objects, and this is not some random estimate. I'll give you two examples. In the last decade, in 2002, there was a big smuggler in Rajasthan who was arrested, and he's supposed to have confessed to selling about 10,000 works of art
Oh,
via an auction house in London. And then he was let go for want of evidence because not one of those artifacts ever came back to India. And I authored this book, which is a non-fiction on the arrest of another notorious smuggler who's currently under trial, Subhash Kapoor. Uh, the U.S. Homeland Security basically raided his stock warehouses in New York. In just 14 storage locations in New York, they seized about 2,622 objects valued at about 850 crores. That's $190 million worth of stuff. Was his holding stock in known storage locations in New York alone. Plus, he and his sister girlfriend have hidden a lot more. Like they have hidden two Natarajas and two Parvatis in New York, combined value of about $13.5 million since 2012. Kapoor was initially arrested via Red Corner notice, Interpol Red Corner notice in Germany in 2011. It's been almost 10 years, and we still can't get them to reveal the location of almost half the loot. And he
oh
was in
God.
business for 35 years, and he's a middle-sized dealer. So, so that's the kind of, and we've got this kind of uh, uh, big fishes every decade, but public seem to have very short memories.
Right.
So we've had big cases in 1965. We had big restitutions in 1980s. But since we've not followed up majorly in terms of enactment, but then to put things in perspective, India and Italy actually campaigned the UN to come up with an international regulations in the 1970s. In the early 1960s and 70s, we were losing by the hundreds, and that was the reason why India and Italy campaigned the UNESCO. And UNESCO came up with a statute in 1970 for protection of cultural property, which was followed again by regulations in India with the 1972 Antiquities Act. And again, uh, the UN statute basically lists a couple of things. For example, if you take Article 5, it says you should set up a national body that will oversee making regulations. You will set up a national monuments authority to document artifacts, movable heritage, immovable heritage. You will publicize thefts. You will have a national registry, a theft database. Nothing which India followed up. Whereas,
Right.
to give you things in perspective, from 1972 to 2000, as per the CAG report of 2013, India brought back 19 antiquities, 1 9. From 2000 to 2013, we brought back zero.
Oh God.
Compare it with Italy, which even after the UN statute, Italy set up its own art squad called the Carbonari Art Squad, centrally funded. They picked the best of their police force, best, gave them the best of the tools, tech, lawyers. They've got back more than a lakh and 20,000 objects since. So and they so in India, for example, the only two states that have some semblance of an art squad is Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and now recently Karnataka. So Tamil Nadu started off as an ambition plan to have an ideal wing with 800 people in 1986. By 2009, it had 7 people, and Kerala, for example, had a temple protection force which has not done anything. Karnataka has started something, but this is the problem is the past. We don't realize the extent, scale, and scope of this theft. You have to understand that a Nataraja was sold by Kapoor, for example, to the National Gallery of Australia for $5.1 million. That's about 40 crore rupees. So if
Wow.
that kind of price tag is put to our movies, no amount of small time policing is going to help.
Correct.
There's another object which was uh, from central India, a Barut Stupa Yakshi, that was a registered antiquity that was supposed to have been worshipped as a Kuladevata by a former registered antiquity with the ASI, was stolen in 2004. It was broken into three parts willingly to enable them to export it to the US. And then it was assembled back in the US through a restorer,
Wow.
and it was in the market for $15 million. So it's now been seized, and since 2012 is waiting to come home. when it comes home, it will be the world's most expensive restituted object.
Correct.
So these are the kind of price tags that are being attached, and these are not some random thefts. These auction houses and dealers are using the best resources. We are our own. Unfortunately, some of our celebrated. I don't want to tarnish the name of the award. Let me call them lotus scholars, who are aiding and abetting these criminals in writing catalogs, authenticating pieces.
Right.
So it's our own people who are taking them on recce trips. So what is happening is basically these auction houses are sending their reps, they used to send their reps to India. They used to go on recce trips, picking the best, the very best of Indian art, and then they will be stolen. So this is not some random theft. This is a
Correct.
made to order loot, which is taking the best of Indian art away from us.
And it's a very well curated, as you correctly mentioned, it's not just randomly walking in and laying your hands on any idol, but you can. Well curated, well documented idols that actually have tremendous value. And there's another point that you mentioned, which is very true. If you place such a high value for the sale of these idols, it's very difficult to get a task force that will be able to mitigate this. You're just talking in millions and billions all the time, right? And it's very difficult to say a small force will be able to fight this.
Somebody is robbing our gods and auctioning them openly as orphans. And if you think that is, forget the price associated with it. It's just the insulting aspect of having your gods aligning swimming pools. There are images of collectors having them in their bedrooms and showcases. To see these living gods being reduced to showcase heroes, I think it's not a question of money. I think it's a question of intent. For lesser things, you bring a television set into an airport today. You have people jumping on you. So I think it's only a question of educating our forces to the extent of this crime. And it's not just India. We are working with Euro Customs, we are working with World Customs, we are working with international law enforcement. Because I think more than India, I think the EU, for example, and America have realized that these are not some good faith purchases. This is a well-oiled market that is bringing in illicit antiquities, and the same antiquities are flowing in from conflict zones like Syria, from Afghanistan, and then they know that this money is not definitely going for charitable purposes. So that's the reason why, for example, America has taken a very, very forceful action against illicit trafficking of antiquities. In fact, last week they brought in new regulations to handle the financial aspect of it, to make it look as financial crime, to look at money laundering aspect and all that. Whereas in India, we are taking a regressive step wherein we want to commoditize it and make the free movement of antiquities within India as an
Smoother.
open market. So
Correct.
I think it's more myopic because right now we don't have hardly anybody attends these international conferences officially from India's side. And I would say that there is a nexus. I'm not saying there is no nexus, but I think there is no responsibility. There is not a single person who is tasked with answering questions. And in fact, even at the largest portals of our democracy, we are still talking single digit numbers and trying to fool ourselves. So even if you do a normal Google, every week we hear of some theft somewhere across India. But then in the houses of parliament, we are talking about fives and tens, which cannot be true. And everybody knows it cannot be true. So unless we realize that there is a problem, I don't think we can find a solution.
And the apathy is also helping this theft go unnoticed, right? Or no, I would not say unnoticed, but unquestioned.
As long as the demand exists, supply exists. So as I said, the demand is so much. So people don't want to realize that you've closed the tap in 1970. The UN statute basically says any theft after 1970, if you can show me in situ pictures, then you don't have to pay compensation. You can take it back. And then that means after 1970, nothing can be exported. But then every auction we are seeing Indian art that is coming out. So the idea is obviously because like places like Cambodia, Italy, Egypt have started looking and claiming their artifacts more strongly than India. India is still trying to portray itself as a soft power, working on photo ops where we don't want to reveal the name of
Right.
anybody who returns, which doesn't happen quite often. So I think we need to be more aggressive, engage in litigation, make sure that auction houses are brought to the book instead of just waiting for things to happen.
Absolutely.
That's one thing. Number two is I think the forces also have to be incentivized. Basically, because for example, if they catch contraband or drugs, obviously it's much more beneficial for them. So that means they can work. So if you restore a murti, of course, for you and me, it might consider uh, pious needs, but then end of the day, it's monetary, and as we see, these money is big money involved. But frankly, I don't think it's a question of incentive. I think it's the lack of awareness on the scale and scope of the loot. And in one way, I think we are trying to fool ourselves to think that it's not a big problem.
Absolutely. I think to a large number of people, in fact, that's one reason for this conversation as well. I do see a lot of people saying that, well, it's an idol here or an idol there, but I think it's only the idols that have been discovered and brought back. There are just so many, I'm sure you can reel off, thousands of them that have been stolen where we have no track of where they are. Or we have a track, but getting them back is going to be incredibly difficult as a path. And for most people, it is just the one or two that come in the press. It's just these two idols that might come as pictures, and they think that that's all we've lost.
The main problem is deterrent. So right now, India for a long time did not care, so there was no deterrent. So unless the pressure is maintained, there's no point in carrying this on. But the larger thing people don't realize, we're not just talking about multis, we're talking about pillar fragments and all that, and illegal excavations that are going on everywhere. People are searching for precious objects. So we hardly know anything other than a few dynasties in our school books, because half of Northeast has not been excavated.
Sure.
So what great king's future lies unburied there? When people dig, they throw away. So the main problem with illicit digs is the lack of context. So you're destroying context. An archaeologically important object, at what strata it was excavated, what was it excavated with. For example, the Sugar dynasty of Chandraketuga. It's something that nobody knows, and every
Nobody
museum
knows.
in the world has these amazing artifacts, terracotta objects that are everywhere. So the idea is, if you allow people to go and dig, either the government has to dig, or you have to at least protect it. Maybe for the next generation, hopefully they have the wherewithal and the respect for our culture to pursue such. But then if you don't allow proper protection of these sites, people are digging for gold. People are digging for sellable items where they will discard archaeologically important aspects, a pottery fragment or of an object that's been fried, which could actually date these objects, a fragmentary inscription, a clue to the Indus seals, for example,
Absolutely.
and a habitual offender would throw it off. So I think it's more context wherein people don't realize what great king's future of a new state would come to. So I strongly believe that we have to protect what is there. Even if it's not excavated, if it's under the ground, let it stay there. It stayed there for thousands of years. Maybe in 10 years' time, somebody else would come and do a proper excavation.
A proper excavation, well documented, and a careful preservation. I think that is more important. Right? So let me.
So this was at India House in London, early part of towards the end of last year. So this was a bronze Vijayanagara period, 15th century bronze of Rama, Lakshmana, and Sita. It was one of the toughest cases, but one of the most satisfying. So what happened was I've been trying to find the Rama here since 2014-15, when random dealers in Europe had this image. By looking at him, I knew. So we're going to introduce the concept of a buried hoard and an under worship bronze. So when there was a raid in South India, say around 1314, there was an invasion and a lot of our murtis were damaged. So the Agamas actually prescribed how you could save some. So basically, you bury them by digging a pit. So there is a ceremonial burial. If there's no time, then you throw it into a pond or a lake or a tank.
Right.
So bulk of these buried hoards we still keep getting in southern states, especially in my home state of Tamil Nadu. Every year we get unfortunately, there's no proper reasons as to why the custodians went to such an extent to give them the safety of a burial. but they didn't have the time to bring them back to worship. So this is
Right.
something that has not been properly answered by a lot of people. The only two solutions are that there was such a great threat that the people could not return back for many generations, which is not true because the threat only stayed for about a couple of months. Or the only possible explanation is the custodians gave up their life rather than reveal the secret
Right.
location of them. So basically, that is the only possible explanation. So when these bronzes are buried, they are filled with incrustations. Bronze basically oxidizes. You get a greenish patina that forms on them. So when I looked at the central figure here, I knew that it was not buried bronze. It looked like it was under continuous worship. So it was quite nagging me. And at that point of time, we had only one of these male bronzes in our radar. So we were trying to find it out, saying, is it part of a set? Is he Rama or Lakshmana? So because if you see them both so unless the two of them together, the
Together.
smaller one is
Correct.
considered Lakshmana, the larger one is Rama. So,
Correct.
we didn't know whether it was a Lakshmana or it was a Rama. So we just knew from the facial features that it was not a Chola bronze, but it was very beautifully done Vijayanagara bronze. So we were looking at a missing Rama or a replaced Rama because we have a lot of that as well, wherein new made replicas are kept in temples. So we were searching for one missing from a group. When I'm in 2018, a chance visit, we had one of the volunteers look at the gallery from far when from a half open door, we could see another bronze inside, which had a slightly different crown. So if you actually see other images, you can actually see the Rama's crown is slightly different from Lakshmana's crown. So we knew that it was not just Rama. There was another matched image with the same dealer. So that's when we started searching for an entire group that could have gone missing. And by luck could have it, we could identify that it was from a village called Anandamangalam.
Ah,
And we managed to work with the High Commission because we've had a couple of successes with them for the last few years. It's almost become a I would say, a ritual now. On every August 15th, we find something that is returned to India in London for the last 3 years. And we also work with the Tamil Nadu Idol Wing, Mr. Abe, who managed to check and find out that there was a theft that happened in 1978. The case was unfortunately closed for want of evidence and it was tracked as untraceable. We managed to reopen it. And when, with this information, the Metropolitan Police and the Indian High Com in London, Mr. Rahul Nangre, went and met the dealer. The dealer asked for proof. Our matching work was given to them. Thankfully, these bronzes were were documented by the French Institute in Pondicherry in the 1960s and 70s. So, bulk of our work depends on using their archive to find these images. Based on our work, it was so convincing that the dealer had no choice. So he handed over, and then he said, not only does he have the Rama and Lakshmana, he had the Sita as well, which was
oh,
never
wow.
displayed so far. So he next, because these were so a while back, he wanted his name to be kept out, which the Indian government agreed because there's no point going. So he handed over all three sculptures in a ceremony, bronzes, which was attended by the Honorable Minister of Culture, the Tamil Nadu Secretary, right wing, and then they were flown to Delhi, and the minister basically accepted it. And there you see them back into the temple. Unfortunately, of the group, Hanuman is still missing.
Um,
We know where which museum has it. Currently, we are working with India to have the formal process requisition for bringing him back as well.
Wonderful. And this is another such a beautiful set of three. It's even more beautiful.
Yes, they've come back to being the gods that they were. You know, they've gone on a global tour, exhibited as showpiece curios, and then they've come back to reclaim their rightful abode. For us, this is paid. This is our paycheck. We don't ask for any awards or rewards. We don't collect any donations. We don't ask volunteers for any money. So all we ask for is moments such as these and information. So if anybody can help us with information or photographs, we are more than glad to replicate these successes.
Absolutely.
Keep your money to
And
yourself.
and That's beautifully said. And, it's just absolutely stunning just looking at them back in their own beautiful, beautiful form.
The adulation of the villages, at least about 5,000 people had turned up for the village to welcome it, and it's just fanfare. In fact, I had met a couple of the people. The kids are named after this god, so that was how pious and how important the Rama's return was for them.
Absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. So this is the same bronze received by the Tamil Nadu Chief Minister when eventually from London they came to Delhi, and from Delhi they were handed over. So these are officers of the Idle Wing and the Tamil Nadu government, and this shows how and a good cooperation among the authorities and independent researchers like us and activists. Instead of looking at us as vigilantes, we are here. Our only goal is to bring back movies. If you do your job, we are here to support. If you don't do your job, we are going to call a spade a spade. So I think it's high time people realize that not to mess around with us. Thanks to press and media, I think they realize that our intentions are pure, and they might as well comply and share the spoils and the good name.
So, my sort of next question would be what roadmap would you recommend for preserving antiques in temples?
Well, there you see on screen is this beautiful Buddha that was stolen from the Nalanda Site Museum in 1961. It was actually a series of thefts. Two thefts happened in 1961 and 62, early 1962, where 14 bronzes were stolen. 12 on the first theft and two about 4 months later, which is so pathetic about our system. But then one of these have been tracked to the Los Angeles Museum. They're still not giving it back, even though we have the evidence. But what is interesting is we could prove when this bronze came up for sale in 2018 in a TEFAV art fair in Netherlands, because a retired officer of ASI who had met Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, the principal economic advisor to Prime Minister Modi, who is a good friend and supporter, because when he was earlier in Singapore, he was a good friend. He had told them about our work, and in fact, Dr. Biswas, who was the retired ASI officer, basically told him that, can Vijay solve this theft? And I told him, look, I know this case, but unfortunately, we don't have the source photographs. And as luck could have it, he had the photographs. And because we had this photograph, we have our own network of volunteers and friends. And one of our friends from Italy was visiting this art fair in Netherlands. And this is a very, very small bronze. But then the visual memory kicked in. I knew that I had seen this bronze. We managed to stop the sale by interacting with the Netherlands police. The dealer was based out of London. This object came back. In fact, they had messed around a bit with it. They had broken one of the leaves behind the Buddha and welded it on the other side to make it look different. So we went to ICOM. ICOM came in, and they finally agreed that it was the same object based on a match. So, so this Buddha that was stolen in 1961 was finally restituted back again in London on August 15th of 2018, just because we had a photograph. I think that's the key.
Correct.
Documentation is the key, and making sure that we police, not just having a photograph, we have to be active in looking at art sales. So we need to keep a pulse on what is coming up for sale. So without a proper policing, just having the wherewithal doesn't help. And a good combination of these two is what Italy does. So basically, they have internet crawlers, they have image matching software. Right now, we are using old-fashioned elbow-grease and visual memory to do it in our spare time as volunteers. But imagine if we replicated Italy's success, basically trying to shake up the art world, we could save a lot of our bronzes from going up for sale. So that's the main part. The main part is to show that you're woken up, you're diligent, and I think that is enough to shake up the art market. But you have to understand that this cannot be a knee-jerk reaction. The art market has very deep pockets. This object was fenced. We call it fencing. Fencing means they keep a stolen object for decades in storage rooms till public memory is vanished, and then they bring it out for sale. So, so fortunately for us, we managed to catch this one, but there could be hundreds that are stacked in free ports the world over. So this has to be a sustained effort. Kapoor's objects could come out after 10 years, after 20 years. So we need to create a national archive and a national force, and then somebody has to take this on and run to basically come up with a strong, I would say, intent from India to recover its lost heritage.
Unbelievable. And this would be a proper roadmap almost, right? The documentation is critical for you to identify. I mean, even the leaf that was broken, there are so many other factors that you look at in an idol to make sure that it's the same idol. So that is something very critical.
Well, I think it's with practice. It's like playing Uno cards. Once you start training your mind to see, it's just comes naturally to you. You start looking at objects. But again, as you said, we are now talking not hundreds of thousands. So then it becomes more difficult to do visual matching, whereas Italy has all these tech tools and gizmos. In fact, we did reach out to a couple of our own tech companies to come up with it, but they're all scared about litigation because these are opponents with very deep pockets we are talking about. But yes, we are not, we are in this for the long, long haul. So if you are putting up an Indian object for sale, better watch out.
Yeah. And I think we sort of get an answer to this question, but I would like to ask you: are museums complicit in promoting idol theft?
I would say that nobody is a 100% innocent good faith purchaser. In the past, the standards were very lax because India didn't care. We call it optical due diligence. A case in point in Australia, for example, in fact, we had looked at an object. It was a Jain Tirthankara that was. So this is the entire. What you're looking at is the road map. So from bottom left to right is how an idol becomes a murti again. Just to come back to your question, museums basically. I'll give you an example. There was a Jain Tirthankara that was auctioned by a large auction house in an open auction for about £8,000. 7 months later, Kapoor sells it to a very premier gallery in Australia, along with Prabhavali, so it's a marble icon, for $140,000. So even if somebody had done a Google search, they would have known. And the paperwork that he had given, it was bought in 1968 from India. So even if you're going to buy an object, you would Google and check if there is any recent sale
Exactly.
that's happened, and you would know that the same object was offered for sale. So I would say that a lot of museums and collectors have been very, very scant in their due diligence. Uh, Basically, because they knew that India didn't care. They just needed a few papers to do the paperwork. And now, in hindsight, when they've been caught, the punishments are not fair enough in the sense that, again, because museums are funded by a lot of high profile people who, again, have access to tax rebates for their gifts. So this is a vicious cycle. So you basically, in the US and Australia, you give an object, it is valued, and then you get a tax break which you can use to offset your tax liability. So nobody wants to have a scandal. So it's quick, given a quick burial. So quietly give it back to India. There's a photo op.
Right.
Everybody is happy. Prime Minister Modi gets back an idol, and then they think it's a job done. But I think unless there is a complete overhaul of the acquisition process, and whoever has been lax in their waiting process or is brought to the book, the trade will generally go unpunished.
Right.
There is no accountability.
And very little deterrence in the sense of there is no shaming, there is the penalty is
Well, the
very
question
limited.
is, it's cost of doing business. Out of 100 that go, maybe we catch one, and they think it's cost of doing business. Give one, 99 go free. So
Yeah,
that's where the problem is. The problem is you hardly see anyone do time for art theft.
true. And how can public-private collaborations actually help mitigate this issue?
See, the first thing we would say is first visit temples, whichever may it be. So, or an Indus seal, an anthropomorphic form. It's all the shared heritage of India. So I said, whatever is your place of worship, please visit it. Because especially on the Hindu faith, because there are so many of us, so many, similarly, the Jain Murtis, we have so many abandoned around. So the first thing that we would like to do is at least first visit the place. So at least you keep going there. They're not ruined. And then you know something when something is missing. The second thing is something goes missing, report it. That's the least that you can do as custodians. And if you hear something that has gone missing 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, don't think it's a gone case. As I've shown to you, a stolen object continues to be a stolen object, and we can always fight our case. So we are now working on two major cases where an old man who told us that something was lost in 1971. We managed to reopen the case, and we have tracked the object to a major museum in the US. So I think if the prime objective is we need in situ photographs, or at least an FIR, or the least case something has been stolen. The biggest problem we have is we know the paperwork is false. We know that the object is smuggled, but then we can't find out from where it is. And that's again the problem with India. Italy, for example, cares a damn about proof. The onus of proof is shifted to the seller. They say you are
Okay.
selling an Italian antiquity, you show you are the legitimate owner, otherwise it's mine. Whereas the India side, because we are still on the soft diplomacy angle, they ask us, show us proof, show me the proof that it was physically stolen, give me an MLAT, give me the official request, give me a copy of the FAR. In fact, Australia sent one of their researchers to physically come and check. Now we have an Alvar statue that is in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, which was found to be stolen. They want to physically come to India, go to the temple, check before handover. I said, there is an FIR, there is an image matching, which is already proved, just hand over. Why this drama that, no, you've been caught with your hands on a stolen Murti. So, yeah, so it's a lot of drama that is happening. But I think you've seen that in the last, since 2013, restitutions are becoming more and more common. So I feel that the global art market, at least in the open auctions, are little more diligent. But only about 30% is on open auctions. Much of it is in private placement. So it's now that they know that we're watching out, it's going to be even more difficult to
More
find out.
difficult,
So
right?
that's where I think, yeah. So that's where I think it makes more sense. But I'm quite happy with it because it kills the major buyers. Major museums are not going to buy something that is, you come to the back of my shop, I'll show you something. This hopefully will not
Correct.
happen. So at least 50% of the market is dead. So now it's going to the collectors again. He can keep it in his bedroom. He can't even bring it out because he never know who will take a photo and send it out. So that's our request to the public. Whenever they see an art for sale, we ask them to take a photo and send it to us. Our Twitter handle is just hashtag bring our gods home. You can look me up on Twitter as well. So, so that's it. So whenever you see any object that is new in a museum, take a photo with you, take one without you, send us the photo without you. So if it's really useful, we would come back to you and ask for more details. So that's how the
Absolutely.
last, I think, 14, 15 years, without spending any money, we have collected the largest distributed database of Indian art all over the world. Thanks to IT and tech, every city has someone from our side. So we use social media and collected it. Now comes the difficult part of making sure that India marries strong regulation, and the custodians are also uh, tuned to also look at temple theft on similar lines, because right now temple theft and idol theft is considered the lowest. So you'll be surprised to know that we don't even have a section to book. The section that we book under IPC or under Customs Act if it is exported. So under Customs Act of 1965, they have to have physically committed an offense under the Customs Act. So if they've not, then you go under IPC. IPC, the maximum is 6 years. And the section is actually housebreaking theft.
Yeah.
And in my state of Tamil Nadu, unfortunately, in 1993, they made an amendment which says that if you steal from a temple, it is only half, 3 years. If you steal from a house, it's 6 years. So special amendment Tamil Nadu, 1993, the IPC section is amended to give half the punishment if somebody steals from a temple. So that's how bad
That's
the
quite
current.
shocking. Given that you would expect it to go the other way to have a more stringent
Yeah.
punishment for those who have taken
True.
from a temple. And
Yeah.
that's completely not deterring.
And nobody's going to explain the logic or rationale behind
Right,
it.
right. I mean, I'm still trying to grasp on why it is, in fact, less punishable to take it from a public temple.
Mm,
They treat it as a god almost, rather
yeah.
than your own home.
Well, Tamil Nadu is quite unique because we are just talking about murtis now. We have not even ventured into vahanas. We have not mentioned into temple
Absolutely.
chariots, temple ornaments, jewelry. So there's been a lot of loot. So it requires a complete overhaul. But my life, I think, will be dedicated towards looking at mobile antiquities because that itself is such a. But hopefully, in the next year, post-corona, you'll see a lot more restitutions happening.
Oh, that will be wonderful. What are your 5 suggestions to address and reduce a slightly different topic of temple desecration?
Well, first of all, I think again it's all coming to two causes. One is lack of people going, which is earlier days. I still remember even in small villages, every morning people would go to the temple, evening people would go to the temple and come back. That unfortunately has stopped for various reasons. So I would say that first of all, we have to re-establish temples as centers for congregation, art, whatever. That's number one. I think temples are well equipped if their lands and properties are restored. They today all you need is a proper security system. There are so many villagers who can be the locals who will take that if they are provided proper remuneration. I think it's not a question of non-availability of money. It's just that temple lands have been misused for so many. I've seen lands that are going for 6 rupees and 7 rupees
Yes,
annual rental and unpaid for a decade. So I think if we just stop and say that we will look at it in all fairness, the government considers it and restores at least a fair value and stop all this bullshit of 99-year leases. All I think there's time to bring in a regulation to just cancel out all these British era 99-year lease, 100-year leases and say that
correct.
maximum 5 years, get out after that. And if you have any litigation, okay, litigation, you don't have to pay, but get out now. Henceforth, from 1st of January, for example, 1st of Feb, we'll have a new tenant. If you want to, you bid. I think technology today. So if the temples, and what are we talking? We're talking about 5,000, 10,000 rupees for a security guard. So it's not a big deal. Every village, for example, has say max 3, 4 temples. So it takes care of. So I think I'm not too keen to go for high technology like CCTVs and all that. So hardly any work. So now because they're so dark, so I think security is enough and are well documented. So all they have to do is take a good photo, have one in the temple register, give one to the local police station, and one to a national authority. So once it's stolen, you have to make sure it is publicized so that it becomes unsellable in the international market. Whoever buys it knows that it's a stolen antiquity, so he has not done due diligence, so he has no title. So if we do these simple steps, and then we should go after the auction houses to say that if you want to sell any Indian art, the owners of proving you have a title of legit export is on you. Otherwise, you file it with me. So we will keep who is the supplier. Henceforth, if new evidence comes up, we can go after the who is the seller and the buyer. I think
Right.
this is something that has to be like a national register. We must have an international register of Indian art. So we don't put a draconian rule to clamp down to say that you can't sell Indian item. But anybody who sells it needs to have like a pre-approval letter, but which is not a blanket approval. It just says that right now we know it's not stolen, but any future date, if new evidence comes up, you have to
Correct.
hand over. And lastly, I think India, right now we're working about 65 to 70 hard cases wherein which will empty most of the major museums of the world. I think museums have to realize that they're holding on to stolen art and they've held on to them for 40, 50 years,
Right.
charging their whatever dollar or pound. So I think it's high time that museums are magnanimous to return stolen art. Do the right thing. That's what we ask. You have a stolen object. Instead of asking when it was stolen, was it one day before the UN statuette? Was it 1 year before the UN statuette? For example, Australia has a standing summon that it was stolen from the Sirgari temple in 1968, which they have not returned, but they've returned something that was stolen in 1978 because they know it's contravention of the UN statuette. See, common law is common law. You signing a statuette or you not signing a statuette doesn't launder a stolen object. You have a stolen object, return it back. You've enjoyed it enough. For 30 years is not good enough. Please return
Right.
it back. And that is the request. We will find a way, otherwise, to get it back from you. It's going to be a long drawn litigation. You will be embarrassed in the public. Instead of that, spare us the agony, give our gods back.
No, that's really nice. And it's really, I think this timing of, pre this particular year or post that particular year is when we will return is not a feasible and a practical solution. Yeah, as you said, a stolen art is a stolen art.
Well, India has its own. Yeah, India has its own antiquity laws from 1878, actually. So it just means that if it's pre 1970, we have to go to court, which
Correct.
unfortunately our custodians are not too keen to do because they have their budget constraints. In fact, Subhash Kapoor's objects that were seized, the US promised to Prime Minister Modi when he visited in June 2016 to give back 200. They gave him 8 to carry along. The ASI, along with budgets, managed to send people. They said, we will come and pick of the 2,622. We will come and pick the 200 after checking. So they finally managed to send somebody up there in December of 2019. After almost 3 years, three of them went to the US, and over 4 days, they managed to find only 68 objects. So, and they said send us this. So it's ridiculous to me to say somebody is giving you 200, pick the most. You have a list which gives the values, which gives the state. Just pick the top. Your photographs. What does it do to? They say it could be a fake. Who cares? Somebody was trying to sell it for $15 million. That's the top item on your list. Let them send it here. Keep it in your museum. If it's in the temple, send it to the temple. Who cares? So the US don't want it. They are basically
Right.
paying storage for a seized object. So it's just that our own people don't want to accept, because if they accept, they have to accept that it was exported in the first case and stolen in the first case. So
Correct.
it's
Correct.
just that sometimes it's quite ridiculous, the kind of red tape that we have.
But it's wonderful. Thank you so much, Vijay. It's been incredibly informative. And I felt that this conversation was very necessary because I think the movement to understand and to be part of this has become larger. And I just see that, there are a lot more people interested in figuring out what it is, or if perhaps they can contribute in some small way. Not
We never intended to be in this path. We firmly feel that the gods have decided to come back and we are just the vehicles. So when they want to come home, they will choose the time, the vehicle to come home. We are just doing our predestined roles. Uh, so let's hope more come home and we have more occasions to celebrate. Thank you.
absolutely.